Okay, good morning. My name's Gary Matsuoka, and we're here at Laguna Hills Nursery in Santa Ana. And today's topic is planting the backyard orchard. Well, in some neighborhoods, you can be a front yard orchard too. So, and that's, if we're going to be using precious water, it's nice to be able to grow something that we can consume. So we'll be talking about that. Our bare root season's coming up in a few months, so that's another reason for this class. So we'll talk a lot about the plants that we sell during bare root season. Now, the unique thing about Orange County is that we're subtropical. Florida is considered semi-tropical. Florida has that weather where I've been told by people from Florida, 11 months of Vietnam and 1 month of Minnesota. So so tropical plants do better in Florida, even though they get really cold because they have 11 months to recover. Here, we've got about 2 or 3 months of really warm weather, 6 months of mild weather, and maybe 3 months of somewhat coolish weather. So we can grow a lot of the temperate climate plants too that they can't do in Florida. So one of the big topics we have to worry about, or big issues we have to worry about, is chill factor. So a lot of plants that evolved in the temperate zones like North America, Southern South America, primarily it's Eurasia. A lot of temperate climates. In fact, it's the mild temperate climates like middle of China, middle of the United States, where the plants have to be able to figure out how to get through winter. Because if you're in Tennessee or Georgia, sometimes they'll get an 80-degree day in January. And the plants can't afford to wake up in January because they'll get another frost, say in February or March, and it'll ruin the new growth that comes up. So they have to figure out a way to stay asleep. So plants that come from those climates have evolved what is called a minimum chill requirement. Now, 30, 40 years ago, they thought that was this temperature's below 45, but then lately they found out, well, not lately, 30, 40 years ago, we found out that no, it's not below 45 because if you get much below freezing, nothing happens in a plant. It's totally, nothing happens. I mean, chemical reactions don't happen. So the plants that need the chill experience it's actually the flower buds and the leaf buds on the branches. It's not the roots, it's not the trunk, it's actually the growth buds on the plant, the flower buds and the leaf buds on the deciduous trees like apples, pears, and the stone fruit, apricots, nectarines, peaches, plums, cherries. They need this chill between 34 and 55 degrees Fahrenheit. Now, it's not equal chill throughout this range. You get your most chill around 38, 40 to about 45, 46 degrees. That's your maximum chill. It may be slightly over an hour. They're calling it an hour, but what I've been told by professors is that nothing's straight lines. Everything's bell curves. So say if you have 30 degrees and 35 degrees and 40 degrees and 45 and 50 and 55, the chill is going to be something like this, and then it drops down to nothing beyond 55, and then it goes negative when you get above 60. So you get your maximum chill somewhere in this range. You get very little chill above 50, but you still get some chill. And like last winter, well, they have two ways to monitor it. 45 and below is one way, and the other way is to measure this chill at this hour and then go negative values when you get above 60 degrees. So they monitor it two ways. This is the one that helpful for us is called the Utah model, and the other one is just anything below 45. Well, last year we had an unusually cool winter. It wasn't cold. We didn't get any frost, or maybe one day of slight frost. But we spent a lot of time in this range here. So on the below 45 degrees, the lowest number we saw, because a lot of the chill stations, there's chill stations all over California. The one in Irvine, which usually is the worst one, it usually shows the least amount of chill. They recorded about 490 hours below 45 degrees. And for the other chill, they did about 870 hours of temperatures between 34 and 55 this last year. That's the most we've seen in 15 years. So we had a span in there, 2014 through 2017, very few hours of chill. I mean, it was, we had 90-degree days in the middle of winter. I mean, this last year, we didn't see anything close to that, anything close to that. It was all maybe up to 70 in the wintertime, and that was it. I mean, we spent a lot of time in the 60s and 50s and 40s. So we had a lot of chill. But, if you say 2014, we had, the Irvine thing said we had like 50 hours. So what happens a lot to trees that require chill, like the plum trees, the years we didn't get any chill, they wouldn't wake up. They wouldn't wake up until August. So they were just sleeping. They were waiting for the chill. And finally, around August, they put out a few leaves. The peaches, the apricots that didn't get their chill requirement, put out a few leaves, grew about an inch, and that was it for that year. That's all they could do when they have no chill. They just don't have any vigor at all and don't grow, which messes up the next year too, because if they didn't grow this year, there's not much flowering wood for the next year. So you have to have 2 good chill years in a row to get a good crop. Now, last year, 2 winters ago, we had decent chill. This year, we had great chill, but we had a really cloudy spring that was too wet. So a lot of plants that wanted to fruit and flower and fruit, they weren't able to do that because of the weather. So that kind of messes you up too. I mean, the years you get good fruit production on everything is when we have a real cold November, December, January into February, and then it's suddenly 80 degrees and dry. And then everything, because we had those years back in the late 80s, everything just explodes in the bloom all at the same time. The whole yard's in bloom at once, and okay, we got a good crop on everything this year. We didn't see that this last year. The year before, though, it wasn't too bad. We didn't have quite enough chill on a lot of things, but we still had that dry spring, dry, warm spring, which helped. We had a dry, hot spring, in fact. Last year was, 80 degrees in February and 104 in April. It was a little too warm, so we burnt a lot of fruit. So anyway, the plants that have this chill factor, apples, pears, stone fruit. Some of the nuts do. Walnuts, almonds are in the stone fruit family. Well, cherries are stone fruit. Now, the interesting thing is apples can get around it. Whereas most of the other things that require that chill can't get around. Pears, to some extent, can get around it too. They just wake up when it gets warm and the flower bud's still open, whereas stone fruit, if we don't have a cool winter, they hardly make any flowers. So the crop is nil, really non-existent. Um, so the other thing about know about chill is that cold air in the winter, especially if the air is not moving much, settles. So the spots in Orange County, or spots anywhere that get the most chill, are the places next to the riverbeds. So if you're either in a canyon where the water collects at the bottom, or near a real flat area where there's no hills nearby, or you're low, just flat, cold air settles there, won't move. The Santa Ana River and San Juan Creek and Laguna Canyon Road tend to be the cool spots in Orange County. Anyone who lives within a half mile of the Santa Ana River seems to get, even last year they got 700 hours of chill, 500 to 700, and this year they had well over 1,000 hours of chill. Whereas right here we're on a slight plateau. We got over 400 hours, but nothing like it was near the Santa Ana River. And if you live on the hills above Tustin or above Anaheim or above Irvine, you have the least amount of chill. So the hilltops, like I used to live in Mission Viejo on a hill, and at the bottom of the hill was Trabuco Creek, which is about 200-foot elevation drop. And I still remember in January of one year, we had the sprinkler, everybody's sprinklers going in the morning in January. Halfway down the hill, there was ice all over the ground where the sprinklers are on. And I can imagine at the bottom of the hill at Trabuco Creek, it was well below freezing down there. Whereas at my house, it was in the 40s. So generally, just the fact that you have elevation change. So, in theory, we know on mountains it's colder. So it's just due to air density. So on mountains, the air is a lot less dense than down low. And temperature happens to be how many molecules hit you at a time. The more air molecules that are hitting your arm, the warmer you feel. So the denser the air, the warmer the air is anyway. On a mountain, there's so less dense that it's colder up there because there's fewer molecules. They might be more energetic, but there's so few of them that you can't warm up. So the mountaintops are cooler, and that temperature change from density happens to be 1 degree every 200 feet. But in our areas where we're below 1,000 feet, the cold air, even on mountains, the coldest part of the mountain is not the top of the mountain. It's some of these little gullies below the mountain where the cold air drops into those areas. But so, on top of Santiago Peak or Mount Baldy, it's 10,000 feet. So that's 10,000. Figured out it's 1 degree for every 200 feet. And we're only at 400, 300 feet here. So it's quite a bit colder up there at this moment. But again, the valleys next to the mountain are probably a little cooler than the mountaintop itself. So if you live on a hill area, the hills in Orange County get very little chill. The low spots get the most. Now, if you're growing, and I had a friend who is a professor down at Myra Costa College, or he's retired now. He says this property drops 50 foot to a creek bed, and he says it's about 20-degree difference from the top of the hill where his house is down to the bottom of his property in the creek bed. So he grows his papaya trees on the top of the hill, and he grows his cherry trees at the bottom. So if you happen to have a property like that in hilly areas, and you own the top and the bottom, you've got a good range of climates there. So a lot of our customers do live on hills, and I've been to their homes, and they can grow papayas on the hills and rarely have problems. Papayas do not like to drop below about 55 degrees. Now, there are interesting areas in Orange County if you drive around in the wintertime with your car thermometer. Like one time I was in visiting my mother's house in Mission Viejo on around Christmas, 45 degrees there, and we went out to eat Costa Mesa at a steakhouse, 58. I was going, my God, you can grow papayas here. You can't grow them in Mission Viejo where my mom lives. 45 degrees, I hate that. 58, that's like in Hawaii in the winter time. Anything above 55 is fine for tropicals. You get much below 55, they can run into trouble. Yes. Papaya doesn't seem to bother them much at all because the leaves are horizontal, so the air coming this way doesn't seem to bother them. So we haven't had problems with papaya trees in the wind. I mean, if the ground is really wet and it's windy, sometimes they fall over in the rain because their roots are not there anymore. I mean, bananas have a lot more trouble in the wind because their leaves are so broad. But papayas, I haven't seen much problem at all. So, and the other things that we have, the other thing to know is that the way the sun acts. So if this is your house, and say this is the south side and this is the north side. So on the south side, of course, in the wintertime, the sun's coming from this angle, and it's hitting that wall really good. But on this side of the house, the shadow of the house comes out. If it's a two-story house, it'll come out 20 feet. So this is all shady. Now the shady side, in the shade in the wintertime, it's a few degrees cooler than it is on this side. I mean, this side may be a few degrees warmer than the air temperature. This side's going to be a few degrees cooler. So on this side, you'll put your tropicals against the south side of your house to keep them warm in the winter. North side, we put the plants that need chill. So on the north side of my homes, I planted things like cherries and plums and pluots, things that we don't get enough chill for. On the south side, definitely put them on the north side, because in the summertime, when a lot of especially when the stone fruit's ripening, they all ripen between May and August, when the sun's pretty much at its highest. So just so you know, first day of spring, first day of winter, the sun's at its lowest. The first day of summer, it's at its highest. So the first day of summer, that shade off of a two-story building may only be a foot or two. It's almost nothing. Whereas on the south side, we're getting shade against that wall pretty good. But north side, there's hardly any shade beyond the edge of the eaves of the building. So you can have a peach tree or a plum tree or a cherry tree on this side. You need that sun to ripen the fruit. And generally, between March and September, you want the sun on a stone fruit, but that's when you'll get the sun on the stone fruit, between March and September, when the sun's at its highest, or more northernly in the sky, and you'll get that sun on there. In the winter, we don't want it. We want them to get chill. So that's actually a pretty good north side of a building, north side of a wall, north side of an evergreen tree. That can work. Now things like fences will trap cold air too. So if you're on a hillside, say you're on a hill that's coming down like this, you got a fence on this end of it, it'll collect a lot of chill against that fence. I remember when we had the coldest temperatures ever recorded in California. I mean, again, we've only been recording temperatures since maybe 1870s, 1850s. So, the climate record doesn't go back very far. So, we don't know what went on in the 1600s or 1700s here. But the coldest temperatures ever recorded were 1990, which is pretty recent. 23 degrees right here, 2 days in a row for 4 hours. But what we noticed at my father's nursery in Lake Forest is our property slanted downwards. It was about a 20-foot drop over 300 feet. We had a tall, solid fence at the bottom of the property. So we looked at for all the frost damage we had, and it lined up right with that fence top. So that fence was trapping the cold air right at the top of the fence, and everything below the fence line froze. Everything that poked above it wasn't frozen. So that fence trapped the cold air in a nursery. So any solid object, when the air is very still, the cold air just settles just like water. And that was cold enough here we lost all our avocados. What we learned that, you learn a lot when things like that happen. The mangoes weren't touched. We're going, okay, this mango tree is stronger than that avocado tree. So now anytime your tree gets a bigger trunk, it's more insulated. So we had avocados with trunks this thick. They weren't very well insulated. Once the trunks get like this, you'll lose the foliage and some of the smaller branches, but the tree itself is fine. It'll regrow out of that. So same goes with a lot of tropicals. A lot of tropicals. That year our guava froze down to about 3 foot. It still grew back and fruited that year though. So they can fruit off of new growth that comes out of the trunk. So a lot of plants get around that. So anyway, so we have the plants that need the chill to wake up on time. There are other plants we sell that are deciduous, like mulberries and persimmons and jujubes, pomegranates. They don't need winter. So all they're responding to is that when it gets cool, the leaves fall off, and you get any sign of warmth at all, they wake up. Now, what we know about mulberries and jujubes is if there's no leaves on the tree, they bloom. So you got to get those leaves off the tree, but once the leaves are off the tree and it's warm, then they start growing, but their growth has flowers on it where the leaves come out. The flowers come with them. So with mulberries, now we discovered this by accident. So most mulberries wake up with the first sign of spring, and sometimes the first sign of spring for us is in December, and they would start blooming and make crop, have the leaves come out even when it's cool. And then we found out that in the summertime after the fruit's ripe, you strip off the leaves on a mature tree, not a young tree like this that doesn't have the strength to do it. On a mature tree with the trunk, say that big or bigger, it just wakes up again. You strip the leaves off and it just acts like it's spring again. It just leafs out, blooms, makes another crop. And we've done single branches on old mulberry trees 3 times in 1 year. You get a crop, strip all the leaves off to make another crop, strip all the leaves off to get a third crop. We found out because one of our customers didn't like the mulberry that we sold them. So they pulled it out of the ground in July after the fruit had fruited, brought it back to us, totally wilted. So the tree just shed its leaves. He put it back in a pot and just came out again with fruit. We go, okay, let's try this on our big mulberry tree at our house. And we got fruit after fruit after fruit load crop. So they have that ability. So all they want is no leaves and warm temperatures, and they grow and flower and fruit. If there's leaves on it, once the leaves come out, they won't put out any more new growth to make more fruit. But you take that off, they want to wake up, they have to put, now you can't do it immediately, you can't do it too fast. You have to wait till the fruit's off and mature, and by that time, they're set to make another set of leaves after that fruit's ripened. So mulberries can live almost anywhere in the U.S. So I would imagine, if you're in Minnesota, you only get 1 crop. You only have time for 1 crop. So they're set for that period. In 3 or 4 months, they can make a set of leaves, a set of fruit, and they're ready for next year. Whereas here, we've got an endless summer almost, and you can get at least 3 crops on a mulberry tree. So. Well, when the foliage is mature, you can just run your fingers down the stem like this, and they all just pop off. So it's real easy. Just zip down the branch, and all the leaves just pop, 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 pop. And then it usually at that same time we cut it back. I mean, mulberries grow so fast. We just make it a little smaller, take all the leaves off, and out it comes again. We've seen grapes do 2 crops a year also. So when on those years we had no winters, we had some grapes blooming in November. We're going, this is crazy. Blooming in November, making crop that ripened in April. We cut them black, and they just made another crop a little late, August instead of July. But they made 2 crops in some of those years. So now, right now, this year, we definitely didn't have enough weather to have 2 crops on anything. I mean, it's such a cool year. We had maybe 5 weeks of above average temperatures, but everything else seemed to be at and below normal temperature. And next winter is not supposed to be any warmer. They said with El Nino, we expect a very cloudy winter, which will keep it cooler. We'll see. We'll see. But just so you know, the early 80s, when I first started gardening, I had my own house in the early 80s. We had hot winters. Those are the years we had hot winters, just like we did 8 years ago. Hot winters for the peaches and the plums, nothing would fruit. And then we went the opposite way. We had the coldest winters ever, 86 through 90, early 90s. And we had frost every night, just about every night. I can remember when I was gardening in those days, late 80s, I'd be out there with a thermometer and be 34 degrees at 9 o'clock in the evening, just about every night. So, so we might get weather like that again. In fact, there are many forecasters that are saying that we're probably going to go back to that in the near future. So we'll see. We don't know for sure. I'm sure the global warming people won't want to see that happen, but okay. So the average chill we get around here, so I mean, 10 years ago, we were only averaging around 200 hours in the winter. So if on the sheet, on a description guide, on the trees that require the winter, we put down how many hours of chill that they need to wake up properly and fruit. So like a lot of these cherries, it says 300, 300, 350. The cherries, we're still working with them because we might change the hours because we've not seen cherries not bloom, which is really weird. We're still trying to figure them out. But, peaches are very reliable. We have the number on them. If we exceed that chill number in hours in the winter, they flower, they fruit. It seems even regardless if there's bees out, they still fruit. So they're really predictable. Nectarines a little less predictable. Plums, hard to predict what they're going to do. Sometimes we have perfect conditions and they don't fruit. But generally, last year we had well over 400 hours. So in the 80s, late 80s, and throughout the 90s, we thought anything that had required 400 hours of chill or less was game. But then it kept getting lower and lower and lower. So when we hit like 2005, we're going, okay, 300 hours. And then we got to 2013, we're going, okay, what do we do now? But now it's going back again, so we'll see what happens. So the lower the chill requirement of the plant, the more likely you are to get fruit that year. Yes.
Wow. If you get a fair amount of fruit, but it's pretty small, is it lack of water or lack of food?
Okay, so on just about any fruit tree, the size of the fruit is due to 2 factors. Number of fruit on the tree. The more fruit that's on the tree, the smaller they are. The more you water, the larger they are. So ample water fewer fruit, you get bigger fruit. So if you're, like on peaches, a lot of peaches set a fruit every couple inches. That's too much. So usually on peach trees, we cut off 80% of the crop before it reaches, say, ping pong ball size. You don't want to take it off too early, thin them out too early, because if they're only fingernail size, a lot of times a lot of those will fall off before they reach ping pong ball size. By the time they're bigger than your thumbnail, then it's time to start thinning. And about every 8 inches on a branch, one peach is about right. Plums, apricots, cherries, we don't normally thin those. But if you have a really crazy looking crop, yeah, thin it. That'll help you keep you from breaking branches. So, okay. So what's interesting about apples is that even if, apples would like 700 to 1,000 hours of chill, and we don't get it here. I mean, they get it north of, say, the Tehachapi Mountains. Anything in the Central Valley gets, anything north of Santa Barbara, you get 700 to 1,000 hours of chill. We don't get it in Southern California too well. So what apples do here is that they wait till it gets a certain temperature. So if they don't get their chill, usually around May, they just start waking up. If you're in Oregon, you get your chill, they'll wake up as soon as they get a nice 70-degree day or even a 60-degree day. And that can happen even in March or April. They'll start blooming their apple trees there. But here, the apples, once we get to May and we get 70, 80 degrees going, they just start waking up. And then they bloom, a few things bloom here, a few things bloom there. They'll bloom over at a moderate rate over about a 2-month period. They just can't figure out when to wake up. That's most apples. There are a few exceptions. Whereas if you're in Oregon, they said every apple variety blooms for 2 weeks and that's it. And if you want to pollinate your apples, you've got to choose your apples carefully. If you want to cross-pollinate between two varieties, like they usually do Fuji and Gala together. On apples, they'll make fruit without a pollinator, but without a pollinator, we've seen a lot of times the fruit is misshapen because when you cut it open, there's only one seed inside. Instead of a full complement, 5 or 6 seeds that the apples have? So if you can cross-pollinate, you get more seeds, and the fruit tends to be a little bit bigger and less and better shaped. If you have only one apple tree, they still seem to make at least 70% of their crop, which for most people is plenty. It's just that they're not as shapely as they are if they have a cross-pollinator. But in Southern California, most of the apples bloom for 2 months, so they overlap really well. Now we have a couple categories of stone fruit that require pollinators. Now we don't sell any peach trees that need pollinators, any nectarines that need pollinators. Some of them do. They don't grow here very well, so we don't carry them. They need too much chill, but pluots, pleuries, and some plums are said to need a pollinator. So pluots and pleuries are really weird fruit because they rarely happen in nature. I mean, they can. Or a pleury is when you cross a plum and a cherry, and a pluot's when you cross a plum and an apricot. There's our supplier, Dave Wilson Nursery, cooperates with a breeder in the Central Valley, the Zeiger family. And they don't do GMO stuff, but they do really weird things. So they'll take the flower of an apricot, take the pollen out of it, and put in the flower of a plum, which can happen in nature. But usually what happens is that's not when it's trying to make a fruit, it's not a compatible fruit. It can't develop the seed structure either because the genes are too different. So they do what is called an embryo rescue. So right after it's pollinated, they give it a day or whatever they do. They give it a few hours for the pollen to make it into the egg of the seed there, and then they take it out of the flower and put it in a what do you call it, growth medium, like in a tissue culture lab. They grow it in a lab. They grow the embryo in a lab because it won't develop in the seed normally. The seed will be aborted and it won't ever develop, but they save the embryo that was created, and they put it in a petri dish and grow it that way, and then they grow a tree out of that. Now, Luther Burbank, back in the 1800s, claims that he crossed plums and apricots, but no one believed him until they finally did DNA studies on some of his plums and found out, oh, he did that cross. Without a lab, without anything. So nature can do it, or the trees can do some of those weird crosses too. So Luther Burbank, he was, I don't know, a lot of the scientists didn't really think he was very smart because he didn't record much, but he certainly did a lot of neat things. Most of the plums we sell are Luther Burbank's plums from the 1800s and early 1900s. He did Santa Rosa, he did Satsuma, Beauty. Quite a few of the plums are his thing. When you need the cross-pollination, they used to tell us 25 feet. Now they're saying, no, it's got to be the next tree. Can't be 25 feet. So in the apple orchards, they used to have a row of Fujis and a row of Galas. And then the farmers would watch the bees just go down one row. They would hardly ever fly 8 foot to the next row. They would just stay in the row of the Fuji apples. So they said, okay, we can't do it this way. We have to intersperse the Fujis next to the Galas, Fuji, Gala, just do it that way, because the bees are really lazy. They go to the next closest flower. They don't travel 8 feet through the air to the next flower. They just see the next flower and go to it. So if you have cross-pollination, it's got to be close, almost to the point where it's safer to, if you have a plum that can pollinate your pluot, cut off the branch of the plum that's blooming, put it in a vase, and set it inside your pluot tree, so the bees can go from flower to flower that way. So, okay. Now, as far as soil prep goes, the trees don't need much help. The trees we sell you don't need much help, because generally everything here is in soil that's good enough, and the bare roots don't come with any soil at all. And they can pretty much take any soil you have, whether it be sandy soil or clay soil. They pretty much are fine in either one, as long as you don't put compost in the clay. So compost, and this is next week's lecture on soil. Soil is sand, salt, and clay. So a friend of mine has a farm in Irvine, and he says this is the best farmland he's ever been on. He leases the land, and this is the soil off his property. It's like 85% sand. And he says the crops grow better in this than anywhere he's ever been. So this is perfect soil. The organic content of this is right around 1%. And the University of California, Davis says that, yes, 1% organic matter in the soil is perfect. And in nature, it's 0.9%. Throughout nature, it averages 0.9% to maybe at the max 3% organic. Anytime you have a whole bunch of decomposing stuff in the ground, it steals the oxygen from the roots and the plants start rotting. But if there's none of that organic matter in the ground, even in clay, things will not rot in it. The problem we have is that a lot of, every nursery except for us. I don't know of any nursery, there's a few around, Rancho Soledad, maybe Altman's, that don't use compost to grow their plants in. And it's not their fault. The ecologists told them to do that. They grow their plants in compost. And again, this is next week's lecture, so I won't spend too much time on it. And if you put those plants in clay, they rot. But if you get a plant from us and put it in clay, like guava in compost won't rot in clay. They're pretty much rot resistant. Apples in compost don't rot in clay. But a lot of things, persimmons, bananas, walnuts, you get them in compost, they're going to rot in clay. So as long as you don't mess up your dirt, you're fine. Now, if you're planting in containers, so we find that most plants do fine in containers. Usually you want to be, for a fruiting plant, at least 15 gallon. Bigger is even better. This is a 20-gallon pot. The wood boxes are even nicer because they're better insulated. So the problem we have with black plastic is that in the summer it gets, in the ground temperature is warmer than the air in the winter, and it's cooler than the air in the summer. So the ground temperature, we don't freeze. The ground in the southern 4th states, unless you're on a mountaintop, doesn't freeze. So it's always in the 40s or higher in the ground in the winter, and it's always below 90 in the summer if it's got something on top of it. I mean, if you have bare dirt in your garden and in the middle of summer, if it's a 90-degree day, that soil temperature can be 120 where the roots are. So that's bad. But black plastic, yeah, you can really get hot in here in the summertime. So that's one of the bad things about black plastic pots, is that they can really get hot and they can really get cold. They're the same temperature as the air in the wintertime, and they are usually hotter than the air in the summertime. So that is the problem with a lot of the plants that come from temperate climates. Citrus and avocados don't seem to mind the heat at all. Papayas love the heat. They really like it. So the tropicals love the hot soil, but a lot of the temperate plants do not like it at all. Cherries, we lose cherries in the summer if they're in black plastic. It's just too hot there for them. So, whereas wood, more insulated, regulates the temperature a little better, but wood doesn't last as long. So in the old days, plastic only lasts a few years. Nowadays, plastic, you get 10, 20 years out of it. The wood box is 5 years because it's constantly wet. 5 years, yeah, about it on wood, unless it's oak, like oak barrels. If you find a nice oak half barrel that's not been used 7 times before they sell it to you, sometimes those things last 20 years. But there's a lot of well-used oak barrels out there that fall apart immediately. Yes.
Why would you paint your black plastic white?
Yeah, you can do that.
And then probably
Right. Yeah, okay, so one of the funny things about colors and stuff like that. So in the wintertime one year, we decided to put things in clay and in black plastic and in white plastic to see how they would grow in the wintertime or when it was cool. Nothing grew in the clay. The clay, it's evaporating water. It's just colder than the air. The things wouldn't grow in clay. It was really weird until March or April when it started warming up. The white plastic was almost as bad as the clay. It was so cold in that white plastic that those things, the black plastic, the plants are growing. So that's why nurseries use black, because in California, we only have 3 months where it's too hot, right here. Maybe in the Central Valley, 5 months where it's too hot. But the rest of the year, you want the black because they won't grow in the white. I mean, I had one nursery, a Brokaw, try growing avocados in white plastic because every summer they had to whitewash their black ones. And they found out they won't grow fast enough in the white. It stayed too cool most of the year. So black is what nurseries use because, at least in California, because it's so cool here most of the year. It's just too hot for maybe 3 months. So if you put something next to this, so just shade it, that helps, or you paint it white or hang something on the edge. A lot of nurseries across the United States do this, where they grow plants in black plastic and they put them inside another bigger pot in the ground. So like if you're in Minnesota, you've got this thing in the ground buried, and you grow a plant in here and you put it in there. This will insulate it in the wintertime, and it'll protect it from the summer heat too. So that's called pot and pot growing. That's what they do across most of the United States now, is put a pot in a bigger pot to insulate it. And they also put it in the ground, keep it from blowing over and things like that. Pardon? You don't want mint unless it's in a pot. It takes over. Well, that's true. That could work. Okay, so a lot of things you grow in pots. Now in pots, unless you have automatic watering, most of the time the fruit's going to be smaller than it is in the ground. If you only water once a day in a pot, part of the day the plant will be on the dry side, so the fruit doesn't reach maximum size. If the ground is constantly wet, you'll get big fruit. If you have a automatic watering system, you can water more than once a day in a pot, then you get big fruit, just like you would in the ground. So be aware of that. Grapes in pots tend to be small unless you have, again, a way you can water more than once a day, or have them sitting in a tray of water to get the extra, to stay wet all day. We find that if the tray dries out, like I used to grow strawberries in saucers of water, the saucer had enough water to hold them for a week. As long as it dried out within the week, the mosquitoes couldn't live in it. They needed more than a week to survive. So water them once a week in the saucer, and then by the next week it'd be totally dry in there, and then water it again, fill the saucer up, and it'll hold them for a week. And if you use our top pot, nothing rots in our soil. Any other potting soil out there other than, say, Fox Farm has some soils that won't rot plants. SunGrow does, but they do make things with compost in them. Compost and water rots the plant. So if you want the bigger fruits. Yeah, I mean, you can get pretty big figs in a pot if the soil doesn't dry out during the day. So now, fertilizer-wise, the bare root trees we get in January, if you put them in the ground, you don't need to fertilize the first year. So on farms, when they get bare root trees, they just stick them in the ground and don't fertilize. And they have good reason for that. And farms don't have good windbreaks. Like your yard, you got the house and you got walls around. That stops all the wind. On a farm, they don't have it. So if the tree, like we fertilize these trees in containers, we've already cut this twice this year. So this tree would already be over 12 foot tall. And when we put it in here, it was only, 3 foot tall. And we've had to cut it twice because it would be 12 foot tall in here and just blow over. Well, the same thing happens in the farm. If it's growing that fast, it'll just blow down in some of those strong winds they get on farms. But in your backyard, it probably won't happen. So and we generally do not like to stake up fruit trees. Generally, roots on these fruit trees are over a foot long, and that holds the tree up better than a stake would. Anyway, stake is just one thing. The root system of these trees, bare root, is like fingers going out in all directions for a foot or more, and that's going to hold the tree better than the stake would anyway. So you don't have to fertilize, just let the tree, the trees come with enough nutrients to get at least a foot or two of growth on them for that year. And plants do not die if they don't have fertilizer. They don't die, they just don't grow. So farms, they don't fertilize the first year. We tell our customers, go ahead and fertilize, but you don't have to. Now in pots, you have to, because pots are so devoid of any nutrition at all. Our potting soil has nothing in it other than traces of nickel and maybe some aluminum and silica. That's all they have in there. So you do have to fertilize if you put them in a pot. If you don't fertilize enough, the leaves turn lighter, they get red blotches all over them, and the blotches fall out, making holes. That's starving. That's when the leaves starve. Still doesn't kill them. It just looks terrible. Looks like they're being attacked by something, but the leaf is still functional, and they're still maturing. Even if they're lacking fertilizer, they're still gathering energy and all that. So fertilizer-wise, we generally use two things here: an organic, like the down to earth. We have Dr. Earth too. The prices are a bit high. And then we also like to use this time release, especially in pots. You know, in the ground stores fertilizer better. So when you throw fertilizer on the ground, it's usually there for several months. In a pot, unless it's a time release like this, it gets flushed through that soil in a month. So you've got to redo it, redo it, redo it. So we use time release in pots here, so we don't have to keep going out there and fertilizing constantly. I mean, 40 years ago, that was the standard practice nursery. Every month, you go out, fertilize every plant in your nursery. We don't have the labor for that anymore. Labor is too expensive nowadays, but I used to send my daughter and her friends out with the fertilizer every month. This one is 6 months. There are different osmocotes. They make osmocotes that last 12 months, 9 months, 6 months, 4 months. And this one has pretty much everything. It's 11 of the 13 essential minerals it has. And I would say our potting soil probably has enough of those 2 it's missing that are real tiny amounts. So we'll talk about that in future classes too. So generally, if you're doing a backyard orchard, we do need some pesticides. We like to stay totally organic, of course. The 2 most common things we use are spinosad. We're really happy to have spinosad. Some fruits you just can't grow without it nowadays. So spinosad controls any chewing insect. So caterpillars, grasshoppers, and on top of that, it does thrips. And thrips cause a lot of havoc throughout the garden nowadays. The oils control sucking bugs like aphids, scale, mealybugs, and oils also do a good job on mildew. We had a real bad mildew year this year. So our formula for mildew is 4 tablespoons of oil in a gallon of water, 1 tablespoon of baking soda. And that, our chemical fungicides didn't work this year, but the old formula we used back in the 80s of baking soda and oil worked great. Cleaned up all the mildew. Burns more often, and it's also way more expensive. It's like twice as expensive as mineral oil, but it is a plant sourced oil. This is an oil sourced oil. It's just mineral oil. It's very pure. So they okay it for organic gardening just because oils evaporate and disappear off of the produce. So there's no residual with the oils. We also, if you're growing apples, they get fire blight. They can get fire blight, so we have this garden floss also, which is a fungus. California is registered as a fungicide. In some of the states in the United States, it's just registered as a fertilizer. So it's mono and di potassium salts of phosphorus acid. It almost sounds like the chemical in Diet Coke. But it raises the phosphorus, which is one of the major nutrients in plants. It raises the phosphorus level in their system real high. that they normally can't do, but phosphorus is part of their immune system. So it can help it fight off diseases better. Avocados, orchards use this a lot in their irrigation water, in fact. So, because it helps fight off root rot diseases too. So, so this does root rot and fire blight better than a lot of things we have. Again, you shouldn't get root rot if you're using our soils and our plants. And then the mineral oil. Occasionally we get mites on plants. That's where the mineral oil has its most effect. Persea mites on avocados. A lot of fruit trees can get spider mites. This year we saw bad whitefly and mealybug on the guavas. The other thing you have to do is keep the ants off the trees. So we have a good ant bait in stock too. The ants will take the whiteflies and the scale and the aphids and the mealybugs and move them from your neighbor's house to your trees because they want the most succulent growth to put those insects on. Those insects suck on the sap and excrete sugar water. So the ants use them like dairy. We use dairy cattle as their food source, or the scale and the whitefly and all that, and they protect them. So if you don't have any ants, the ladybugs, lacewings, the parasitic wasps are free to control all the bad bugs. And there are no bugs in California that don't have natural predators, but the ants upset that. So you want to make sure you don't have any ants in your yard, because then you'll have sucking bugs. Yes, they're good guys. Yeah. I mean, the spider mites are bad. Spider mites are actually true spiders, but instead of sucking on bugs, they suck on the leaves. So, okay. Main purpose of this class was actually go over some of the best of what we're selling, the recommended ones for the bare root season. So on the apples, I mean, it's interesting, the most reliable fruits you can grow are things like fig trees. Figs, you rarely ever not get a crop. Citrus, citrus, you rarely don't get crops on citrus. We're not allowed to sell citrus here. Bananas, there's a disease in Orange County, throughout 80% of Orange County, there is a fatal disease running around that they're trying to stop, and they don't want any nursery to spread it. So if we're within 5 miles of a diseased tree that they found within the last 2 years, we cannot sell citrus for 2 years. But they keep finding more diseased citrus trees. I mean, if California really wanted to get rid of the disease citrus, they would just go around and burn down every citrus tree in Orange County, LA County, and San Diego County, and that would do it. But I don't think they have that authority. A guy brought in citrus branches from Hawaii that were totally diseased. You're not supposed to do that. So he smuggled them into California, grafted them onto trees throughout Southern California with the disease on them, and then it spread from there. HLB, Huang Long Bean, or greening disease. So what you would notice on a citrus tree, the first thing you notice is that the orange would be ripening on one side and would be green and small on the other. Half the orange would ripen and not the other half. So it's called the greening disease because your fruits don't ripen right. They're all weird looking. It can also slowly kill the entire tree, but that's the thing that most people would notice first is their fruit doesn't ripen properly. I mean, it makes the leaves turn real pale and yellow in a way that doesn't look like nutrient deficiency, even though it is. It's really weird looking. It is a virus. nobody knew about it until 5, 6 years after he did it. So a guy that lives in Hawaii came here and grafted some of his friends' trees around the LA area. They thought that was the only bad spot, East LA, La Habra, Yorba Linda. But then they found out, oh, must have grafted some trees in Orange County too. So, right, things that are not legal here. So every citrus that we sell in California, the grower who grows the tree has to get the budwood from University of California's certified disease-free collection. That's the only way that they can legally grow citrus. We're not supposed to grow them from seed. We're not supposed to, even though it's probably fine, but you're not supposed to. You have to get the budwood from their quarantined trees. But this guy didn't follow the rules. He may not have even known the rules. Well, he probably did. I mean, the airline people probably told him you can't bring in, but he did it, and that's the consequence. Now, Florida has gotten wiped out by the same disease. I mean, totally wiped out. Florida used to grow 200 million boxes of oranges every year. They're down to 45. They're lower than California. For the first time in 80 years, they are actually producing less oranges in California. So they just got wiped out. Now we had the citrus class a few weeks ago. We're maybe 10 years away from a cure. So they're working on it. But okay, we're talking about the trees we're going to sell. So apples, well, okay, so reliable trees, mulberries, figs, bananas, interesting. Some of the bananas are reliable producers. But apples are reliable here. I mean, it's really weird. We didn't grow apples 50 years ago. We didn't grow apples. We thought they're from far north. They can grow in Colorado. They can't grow in California. Then we started trying them a few at a time. They all produce. Unfortunately, there's two apples that don't produce well here, and that's Honeycrisp and Liberty. And everybody wants Honeycrisp. The weather's good enough in Riverside to grow Honeycrisp, but not here. We're a little bit warmer in the winter, and we don't get as hot in the spring. And that's messing up the Honeycrisp apple. We grew Honeycrisp for 10 years, just so you know. And the biggest apples we got on them are about like this. Because they need the cold, they were bred for Minnesota or selected for Minnesota, so they wake up late here because we don't have the cold. So they just wait and wait and wait. They usually bloom in July, and the fruit ripens in August. So it's like, okay, they got 5 or 6 weeks to develop, so they get that big. They taste just like Honeycrisp, but they don't have time to get size. So in Riverside, they get bigger because they wake up a little early in Riverside. But we can grow the rest of the apples. So the 3 apples that I find, well, all the apples do fine. My favorite ones for my own taste, are Anna, which is from Israel. Now, there's 2 apples we sell that don't follow the rules. The other ones do, Anna and Dorset. Anna's from Israel, Dorset's from the Bahamas. Someone spit out a seed in the Bahamas, and up comes this tree that, the golden delicious seed, this tree that produces fruit year-round in the Bahamas. So Dorset Golden and Anna both wake up in February. So they don't need winter, they don't even need spring. They always seem to wake up in February and bloom at that time. And make an early crop, and sometimes they will fruit year-round if we have a mild year. The other apples all wake up May, June, somewhere in that range. Now, they don't ripen the same time they do in Oregon. So if you're in Oregon, a Granny Smith apple ripens in October. Here, it may take till December to do the same thing, but because we're warm all the way into winter, those apples have a chance. So all the apples have a chance. Like pears, if they wake up late, all the pears ripen in summer. So it's like, my dad used to go Bartlett pears, and they'll turn out to be that big. because they only had a month before they were ready to pick. So that's one of the problems with pears is they don't have the time. They also sometimes don't bloom. Like I grew Camas. They said Camas does well in Orange County. So I grew Camas for 20 years. I got one pear on it. I go, okay, it doesn't really grow well here. The literature is often wrong. So now someone might have been along the Santa Ana River growing Camas pears. They said, yeah, they do fine here. So if you're near a really cold river, you can probably grow some of those European pears. Anyway, we're on apples. So an apple, one of my favorite apples. It's fairly close to Honeycrisp in taste and texture. Um, it doesn't. The early apples like Anna and Dorset are different than the late apples in that they don't have good hang time. So when they ripen in July, an apple, it's ripe when it's about 3/4 red. They're big apples, real big apples, shaped like similar to Red Delicious, and Red Delicious do fine here too. It's like, but anyway, you pick them when they're about 3/4 red. If you wait till they're totally red, they're getting a little mushy by that time. So the early apples don't have good hang time. They get mushy on the tree. If you pick them on the right time, you can store them in a Ziploc bag for 2 months. They'll stay firm and crispy. But they don't stay firm and crispy on the tree, whereas all the other apples that are late apples that ripen August, September, October, November, December, they'll hang on the tree for months without losing any quality. So a lot of those other apples are real good. So I do like Anna though because I like the flavor of it and the texture of it and the fact that it can produce over and over during the year. I do like Pink Lady and Sundowner. Sundowner has been my favorite one that we've grown here. Last year we didn't get enough Sundowners. We had supposedly 50 coming and they sent us 10, which meant that either they had some kind of catastrophic crop failure, and sometimes the crop failure means that the guy plowing them out of the ground didn't have his plow centered right and it cuts through all the trees. So that can happen too. They plow these out of the ground in December, and sometimes you lose your crop that way. Or they had an orchard that wanted too many and they couldn't supply them, so they stole them from our allotment. But Sundowner and Pink Lady are interesting. Sundowner, Pink Lady, and Granny Smith are from Australia. And Australia is like Mexico. I mean, Perth is where Sundowner and Pink Lady are from, and Perth is like Orange County. So they get about as much chill as we do. Granny Smith, though, is from Sydney. And Sydney's like Mazatlan, Mexico. They said they grow the Granny Smiths right next to pineapples. So that thing doesn't need any cold. I mean, it grew up without cold. It just started growing in a compost pile in Sydney, Australia, and they said, oh, this is an interesting apple. Now, the thing about Granny Smith is that, up in Oregon, they don't have enough time to get it fully ripe. So if you ever want to grow a Granny Smith till it turns yellow, you grow it around here, you grow a Granny Smith. You pick it around January, the thing is yellow, it's fragrant, it's sweet. It's still firm, but it's super fragrant and it is really sweet in January. But if you pick it like they do in Oregon in October, it's green and it's really tart. But you can leave it. I would think in Australia, it's always yellow apple there. Because they've got, in Sydney, Australia, you've got 365-day growing period. So those are my favorite apples, are Sundowner, Pink Lady, and Anna. Now, Sundowner and Anna can make huge apples for sure. Pink Lady, just so you know, the research has shown that it takes 8 years for Pink Lady to reach maximum size. Because when I first grew Pink Ladies, they were this big. But everyone loved them. I mean, they said this tastes like a candied apple because it's got that sweet and tart going. Sundowner, its sibling. Now, they changed the names. In Australia, Pink Lady is Crips Pink. Sundowner is Crips Red. Here they changed Crips Red to Sundowner, which now has a bad name. It's a bad name for an apple. It's the Alzheimer apple. but that's a little bit sweeter than Pink Lady and a little bit less hard. To me, Pink Lady's running on, right alongside Granny Smith as firmness, and Sundowner is a little closer to Honeycrisp in firmness. So I think Anna does. It's sweet with just a hint of tartness, because I'll eat Anna down to the core, just like I do with Honeycrisp. Now this year, in previous years, they gave us apple espaliers of different varieties of apples. This year, they're not doing that. They're just doing the combination espaliers where there's 6 different apples on one espalier. Last year, we used to get espaliers of pure Fuji, pure Gala, pure Anna, but for some reason, it's not in the catalog this year. So, and Dave Olson really doesn't do the espaliers. They contract with the supplier up in Oregon to do those. So it might have been the supplier in Oregon that wasn't cooperating this year. Okay, so that's apples. Apricots, the lowest chill apricot is Tropigold. We quit carrying Florigold because no one was ever interested in that one. Gold Kiss was our best apricot for 20 years, but then when Tropigold came out, it's a little better quality and a little bit lower chill. So we've not seen Tropigold miss a year ever. I mean, even those hot winters, the trees that overwintered here still made a few fruit those years and woke up at the right time, whereas Gold Kiss and Florigold would sit there until August and be dormant until August. Tropigold woke up in April, March, April, normal time, and made a few fruit. So we know the chill on that one's super low.
What about the taste?
Tropigold is just a royal apricot that wakes up earlier. So there's in an orchard in Moore Park, one of their trees started waking up 2 weeks before the rest of the orchard. So they just took it and called it Tropigold. So it is a high quality apricot because Royal Blenheim is considered the top quality apricot. And this is just a sport of that happens to wake up 2 weeks earlier, 2 weeks less winter it needs. So, which is quite substantial on apricots. Okay, Aprium, which is 3/4 apricot, 1/4 plum. Cotton candy and Flavored Delight need about 300 hours, so they're not as reliable. The Leocott seems to need less than 300. The Leocott is just a really big apricot, but they seem to produce really well here, even though the literature may not say it does. We tried it because my daughter's name is Leah. We just tried it because of that. And the second year we had the tree, it fruited really heavy. We're going, okay, this tree doesn't need much cold, because that was like 4 years ago, and we didn't have much cold in the winter, and it was still producing. The Cotton Candy and the Flavored Delight seem to both need over 300 hours. So this year was not a problem. 2 years ago might have been a problem. The Cotton Candy is more plum-like, and it is the most interesting of the Apriums because the Flavored Delight and the Cotton and the Leocott look like and taste like apricots. Cotton Candy seems to be in that zone between the two, between the apricots and plums. It's almost the size of a plum, and it actually looks a bit more like a plum than an apricot. It's kind of, well, not really. It's an unusual color, cream-colored fruit without much fuzz on it. So yeah, it does look closer to a plum than the other apriums do. So the cherries are interesting. We're still trying to figure out the cherries. I'll put them down in the how much chill, well, in the order of waking up. Usually, the earlier they wake up, usually that means the lower the chill that they need. Although we're not always certain about that statement. So Mini Royal blooms earliest, then Royal Crimson, then Royal Lee, and then it's Brooks. No, I think it's Lappin's. Lapines, and then Brooks. What's interesting is Lapines is from Canada. And originally they thought the chill on this was 700 to 1,000 hours, which we rarely ever get. I started growing this back in the 1980s, and it fruited the first year I had it. The second year I had it, it fruited. And it seems to fruit every year. It's like the chill is not 700 hours, apparently. I mean, even when we had those hot winters, the thing was this white ball of flowers. The problem with Lapines is it doesn't seem to, well, many of the years I've had it, it hasn't made a huge crop. Even though it had 1,000 flowers, it would have like 100 fruit. I was thinking it should make more fruit. Dave Wilson considers this self-fruitful. But I actually met someone from Connecticut. They said, no, we pollinate Lapines. So that's probably the problem. It needed a pollinator. So that's why we brought in Brooks, because Brooks says to use Lapines to pollinate it. So Brooks and Lapines seem to bloom at this, we think they bloom at the same time.
So do you have to have at least 2 cherry fruits?
We prefer it. I mean, Dave Wilson's saying that this is self-fertile and this is self-fertile. But now that we know Lapines is probably not totally self-fertile, we don't trust this either.
Which one produces the most?
Well, if you can pollinate mini royal, it's got the lowest chill, so it will produce the most, but it's also the lowest quality of the cherries. We think the quality goes this way and the production goes this way. So that's true of most plants, is the lower the chill, the more productive, the higher the chill, it seems to be better quality. So the bloom period, this is, the interval between these two is 2 weeks. The interval between these two is 2 weeks when they start. And they bloom for 3 or 4 weeks, so they overlap pretty good. Like Dave Wilson first brought out Mini Roll and Roll Lee, and we're going, okay. They overlap for a few days, and that was it. That's why they had to bring out Roll Crimson to split the difference, because they were too far apart. But then between Roll Lee and Lapines is 4 weeks. This one we're still not sure. Brooks and Lapines are. Brooks is so new, we're not sure when it blooms yet. If it blooms before Lapines or after, or right on top of it, we're still trying to figure that out.
Generally speaking, would you say if you want high pollination, you should have 2 of exactly the same kind?
No, it's got to be 2 different ones.
Are they different?
They can't pollinate, they don't like their own genetics, they like someone else's genetics.
Oh, I see. Yeah, I've seen that.
So you need 2 different ones. I mean, Dave Wilson's claiming Roll Crimson by itself will fruit.
Yeah.
We just haven't seen much of it yet. I mean, Roll Crimson's been out there for 7 years, 8 years now. Actually, it's more like 9 years. We still haven't seen any big crops on it.
You're doing something right now.
Well, cherries are supposed to take on farms 7 years before first harvest. It is, but my Lapines is always fruited its second year, even though sometimes it's only a handful. It's always fruited second year. But Roll Crimson is taking its time. It's really, my daughter got, I think she said 5 flowers on her 8-year-old Roll Crimson last year, and that was it. So it's taken its time. Now, a lot of times because they're genetically young. So the older the variety, the sooner its offspring wake up and, mature and produce. Like on citrus, Washington Navels and Meyer lemons, because they're hundreds of years old, even a small tree will be flowering and fruiting. Whereas some of the newest blood oranges, they'll grow for 5 years before they ever flower, because genetically that whole strain is on the young side. So with these newer ones that they're bringing out, yeah, they may take longer to fruit than the older varieties. Lapines is the oldest of this group. Mini Roll Lee were brought out at around 1990. Roll Crimson just 8 years ago, and Brooks just 3 years ago. Although my daughter said her Brooks is already fruited. So
So timing the bloom together, that's the trick there.
yeah. Brooks is supposed to need a pollinator, but my daughter says this last year the Brooks is the only one that bloomed and it made fruit. It's possible because she has pleuries that are plum cherries that they were pollinating it, but we're not sure. It takes a decade to figure out who's pollinating who. Anyway, that's your cherries if you want to try them. And cherries are the most sensitive to root rot among the stone fruit in general. So you have to have the better drainage on them. Again, the only time I ever had trouble is when I had them, before I knew what I was doing, I had them in soil that was composty. And our real wet winters in the late 90s, they rotted out. And then I replanted in clay and they were fine without the compost around them.
So Gary, I have a mini royal and a royal Lee, and I only got 3 cherries off of the mini royal, so I probably need a royal crimson.
Right.
Pollination.
Right. Right. They say in the Central Valley they bloom on top of each other, but here they're blooming 4 weeks apart. So that's just because we get warm spells before we finish getting chill. Like Central Valley, they'll get 1,000 hours of chill before it gets warm, so everything wakes up together. Here we'll get 300 hours, and we'll get 100 hours, and we'll get another 100 hours. So a lot of times the lower chill things wake up earlier because we have these warm spells in winter, and then the higher chill stuff wakes up later. Occasionally, we get the chill before we get the warm spell.
Gary, I'm understanding it'd be better to put 2 different kinds and ones that are
Close
to each other
right.
on that chart.
Well, yeah, these 2 aren't close to any of these, so these 3 have to go together. These 2 can go together because now we don't know if Brooks goes here or here yet, so we'll have to figure that one out. Okay, that's the cherries. Now the jujubes don't need the winter. So any jujube grows well here now, but the jujubes, the hotter the better. So sometimes if you're right on the coast, your quality of the jujubes, you don't get much fruit, you can get very good tasting fruit either. More inland is better for jujube. They don't need cross-pollinate. Well, it helps. It definitely helps to get cross-pollinated on jujubes. So all the books, the older books say they're self-fertile, and all the newer books say it's better to have a cross-pollinator. We're not sure what happens on jujubes because a lot of the books are saying that as the plant matures, it becomes more self-fruitful, but we're not positive on that. And some varieties are more self-fruitful than others. We're not positive on that either. But I do know that when I first started growing jujubes, I just planted a GA866. And it would only produce about 10 a year in my yard, and it would produce more in the containers at the nursery. So I'm going, I think this needs a pollinator. So I took home a Sherwood. We had Sherwood in those days, put it right next to my GA866. Then it had 300 a year. So it really made a difference on GA866, but I think they said Lee is totally self-fertile, but to be safe, either you get a pollinator or with jujubes, jujubes are grafted onto seedling jujube plants. So, and jujubes sucker from the seedling rootstock really easily, and the stuff that grows, the suckers bloom right away. So if you were just to leave one sucker that comes out of the dirt and let it bloom, that should cross-pollinate the rest of the tree. And that may be one of the reasons that most of the farms didn't have to cross-pollinate the original farms, because they don't control the suckers on a farm. And that is also the bad thing about jujubes, is that they root sucker. Now, if you plant a jujube and you just leave it alone, it may not sucker much. But if the roots may go out 10 foot in all directions like most trees do. If you cut through a root, it'll sucker right where you cut it. And a lot of trees do that, like at South Coast, no, it was at Fashion Island, used to have rows of poplar trees there back in the 80s. And the gardeners would every year would plant flowers around them, and they cut through the roots of the poplar trees, and eventually it was just hedges of poplar trees. So they had to take all those poplars out. What they replaced them with? Palm trees. But they used to have a row of poplar trees at Fashion Island that the gardeners made them root sucker. So you cut through the roots, and every cut root starts growing a new tree. And I think on jujube, same thing. If you just leave the roots alone, but if you disturb the soil around your jujube, it starts setting suckers up all over the place. So, so that's one of the problems with jujubes. Usually the suckers will bloom and make fruit that are about the size of a pea, which are still edible. Can't. Well, you can surround the tree with a root barrier, and that'll hold them in for a long time. But right, so it's hard. Or you can put it in a big pot. Now, jujubes do not need any cold at all, and they don't like it cool. So when we have winters, the jujubes usually wake up around May when it finally gets warm and start blooming, and then they fruit in the fall. When we didn't have those winters, they were blooming in January. And the fruit was ripening in early summer. So it really changes their entire thing to have, our winters here are too long for jujubes. They'd rather have a shorter winter and wake up a little earlier, but here they wake up late because our springs are cool too. And jujube is the only fruit tree we know that blooms on new wood. Whereas most fruit trees bloom off of, like this branch grew leaves this year, this branch can fruit next year. It won't fruit down on the bare wood that's this year, it won't fruit here. And anything that grows off of this wood won't fruit either. It's got to fruit where there are leaves this year, which is here, here, here. But a jujube, if you cut it down to a stump, as long as you don't go below the grafted area, it will flower and fruit off of new growth. Guavas can probably do it also, but not many plants bloom off of new wood or old wood. Let's put it that way. Okay, so the mulberries we're getting in Pakistan. Now this is a Pakistan mulberry.
Big weeds.
That's how they should be.
Really? I'm just used to being smaller.
Yeah. So we get in the Pakistan, which have the long berries, the skinny long berries, about as thick as a pencil, but 3 to 5 inches long. So the regular Pakistan is 3-inch mulberries. The Cook's Pakistan is the 5-inch mulberries. This, we think, we're not positive though. So if you want to get the Cook's Pakistan mulberry, for sure you buy the bare root one that's labeled that. This one we got from a customer, gave me cuttings. She says it had the longer mulberry fruit, but she only had one tree, so I don't know if it's the original or the Cook's. We think it's the Cook's. We'll find out next year when this thing starts to fruit. But that's your mulberry. The tea's weeping. It's a real small fruit, but it's a beautiful weeping tree. They use it a lot in children's gardens. So at Huntington Gardens, at their children's garden, they got this weeping mulberry tree. It only grows about 8 foot, and then it makes essentially a little teepee of foliage that you can stand inside and pick the fruit from inside. So it's a dwarf tree. They graft on top of a 5 foot, no, they actually don't. They train it up a stake, so it goes straight up, but if they didn't train it up a stake, it would just be laying on the ground. So the nectar plum is one of our best, probably our number one selling fruit tree of the bare roots, nectar plum. So that's a nectarine plum cross. It essentially is a white flesh nectarine with plum colored skin on the fruit and plum colored leaves. So it's actually our best nectarine, quote nectarine, but it's a gorgeous plant too. It's got kind of mauve pink flowers, whereas most peaches and nectarines have coral pink flowers. This has got a mauve pink flower, big flowers. The foliage comes out purple, purplish red. and then it slowly fades to bronze in the summertime. So it's a gorgeous plant, gorgeous bloom, really good quality fruit. Then we have the true nectarines, Atomic Red, Desert Delight, Double Delight, Snow Queen. The top quality of that group is Double Delight, but it needs the most chill. 300 and we think it's around 330 or more hours of chill, which would be fine for this year. Um, and it's also the best quality because it ripens in July. So Nectar Plum is real good quality because it also ripens in July. Double Light does too. All the other nectarines we have ripen in June or earlier. And the earlier you ripen, at least in Orange County, the more you run into June gloom, which can make the flavor not so good. So the better quality fruits, stone fruits at least, now stone fruit, the fruit ripens very quickly. It doesn't have any hang time. I don't know of any stone fruit other than, well, pluots, plueries, and cherries have better hang time. But nectarines, peaches, nectar plums, and plums don't have good hang time. You've got about a 2-day window to pick them at their peak. And for that reason, they need really good sunlight so that they can you make sure they're ripe at the time they're ripe. But if the fruit ripens in May or June, you generally don't expect the best quality. I mean, sometimes we have a hot May and sometimes we have a hot June, but not normally. Now, if you live in the canyons, you'll have a hot May or June. But the closer you get to the ocean, the worse it gets. So the other nectarines like Atomic Red, Desert Delight, and Snow Queen ripen before. Well, Snow Queen ripens right at the end of June, but the other ones ripen earlier, and that can mess up the quality of those fruits. That's why we like the nectar plum so much, because it ripens in July and the chill on it's lower than 300 hours. So you usually get a good crop. Peaches, number one peach for us is for the last 20 years been August Pride. And it ripens July, August. So it's really good at that point. Now the best peach we've ever grown is Red Baron, but the chill on it's about 40 hours higher than August Pride. It was fine this year, and it was actually fine last year, but we missed a lot of years on Red Baron too because it needs over 300 hours. The August Pride never missed a year for us. Never ever missed a year. Even those hot winters, it would make a few, and it would bloom at the right time. So it's really got a low chill. Now the other peaches that never miss, Eva's Pride never misses, Mid Pride never misses, Sazi Swirl, and Tropic Snow. None of those ever miss a year. They're all real low chill, but it's the ripening times that can get them in trouble. Eva's Pride is May, June. Now Mid Pride's not bad. It's June, July. So it's Mid Pride. So the first days of summer it starts to ripen, and most stone fruit, the entire crop ripens over a 2 to 3 week period, sometimes up to a month, depending on how the winter turned into spring. The Sazi Swirl is May. Always a huge crop in May. So like 2 years ago, the first 2 weeks of May, the crop was just horrid. It didn't have any taste at all. But the last 2 weeks of May, the crop was pretty good. Tropic Snow is more like, well, Tropic Snow really varies too. It's hard to say when, but that's the best of our white peaches. Tropic Snow ripens mostly in June. So if you want a white peach, Donut ripens in July. So when Donut ripens, it's really good. It's that flat peach. But we never seem to get many peaches on Donut because we don't get the chill for it. It seems to fruit every year lightly. If we get a better chill, it fruits heavy. And this year, a lot of our customers told us they got a good crop on Donut for the first time ever because we had a good chill year. But a lot of people like the Donut. Here,
I have a Florida Friends one, but that's not what
Florida Prince Peach, probably April. There's a lot of early peaches that produce great, big crops. Early early amber. There's a lot of them that are meant for Florida or Arizona because they don't have any clouds in the spring. But yeah, they're too early for us. Yeah, a lot of those real early peaches that we don't sell, we used to carry them and they would bloom in December. The chill on them was so low they would bloom in December. Going, okay, that's really early, and they would ripen in March and April. So now some years March and April are sunny. Wasn't this year, but some years they are. Okay, pair-wise, so the European pears generally haven't done well here. And the Asian pears have been hit or miss compared to where you live, because they need a winter. They seem to need some winter also. But the hybrids between the two have done better for us. So the pear that seems to be most reliable is the Kiefer. And the Southern King and the Tenosui also seem to be good for our area. Tenosui and Southern King are both the same cross. There's a European pear called Tennessee. Oh, and then there's a Japanese pear called Hosui. Hosui is the top quality Japanese pear known. It is really good. And when they crossed these two, they got both of these. They did that cross in Texas. And both of them seem to produce well here without a pollinator, although, again, we do recommend these two should pollinate each other. And this one we know ripens in August, July into August. This one we haven't, I don't know, people keep buying them, so we never see it ripen. Kiefer ripens in September. It's a little bit late, but it still ripens. We found this one to be better than this one taste-wise. Now we're carrying Hosui and 20th Century, which are both Japanese pears. 20th. Oh, I should just write it that way. 20th Century. And these are two low-chill Japanese pears, but for some reason they didn't fruit at all this year. But they both fruited last year, which we're not sure exactly why that happened. Now, last year we had that early heat wave with a decent winter. That seemed to be real good for the Japanese pears to have, say, 300 hours of chill and then real high heat. They woke up real good. This bloomed at the same time as that, and they both had a good crop. I like these better. My employees like that one better. It depends what your taste is. So Asian pears, the difference is that they're very tender. Like European pears are real soft, and to Asian people they're slimy, soft and slimy. The ice, and they're real juicy too. They just the juice just rolls, falls out of them. So to me, Hosui is the best pear I've ever eaten. But to my Caucasian employees, they don't have enough sweetness. So it depends on your taste. But that's actually a good combination, although for some reason this year, neither one produced fruit this year. But last year, they both had bumper crops. So we're just trying to figure out, again, we had the hot spring last year, not this year. So that might have been the difference because we definitely had the winter for them. So. Okay, so that's our pears. Pears are highly subject to fire blight. And the book does say that all pears eventually die. Again, this helps control fire blight. Now, because there aren't many pear trees in our neighborhoods, you may never see fire. Well, actually, all the streets in Orange County or in Orange and San Ana seem to be lined with ornamental pears, which get fire blight too. So it's like that's where the fire blight's coming from. Fire blight's an interesting disease. The beads are actually the things that spread it. Okay, persimmons. Persimmons don't need chill either, because when we went through those hot winters, they just woke up in January. Normally they wake up in March or April, but when we had no winters, they woke up and started blooming in January. So they just respond to warmth. We do have one persimmon that needs a pollinator. So now generally, the persimmons that are shaped like tomatoes are called the fuyu type. And the ones that are more this shape are the ones that are considered astringent. And these are non-astringent. If they're astringent, it's hard to eat them. If you ever want to experience what true astringency is, you get a hachia persimmon at the supermarket and you eat it when it's barely soft. It's totally juicy, it looks like jelly inside. You take a bite and your mouth just turns to powder. I mean, it totally dries out your mouth instantaneously, and you can't even eat the thing. It's just a weird sensation. You have to wait till the whole thing is just like a bowl of Jello or something. So that there's a tannin in there that causes the astringency. Now, persimmons are native to the United States too. These all come from China originally, but they're native to the southern United States. And the rule of thumb in the southern United States: don't eat them till the second frost. So the frost bursts all the cells inside there, and it destroys the astringency. So the other way you can eat persimmons is you put them in the freezer, thaw them out, put them in one more time, thaw them out, and by the time you thaw it the second time, they're no longer astringent. Of course, they'll turn to Jello in your hand, but they're no longer astringent. The classic way in Japan is you throw them in a empty sake keg. The ethanol does the same thing to the cells. So a friend of mine, one of our former employees, he said, yeah, you put them in a Ziploc bag, a drop of alcohol, your vodka or whatever, on the stem end of the fruit, and you close the bag up, and overnight it becomes non-astringent. So that's the other way that they do it, is they use ethanol. But the ones that are shaped like this, generally you can eat them when they're rock hard. Now, the original fuyu persimmon, we rarely see seeds in hachias. The original fuyu had seeds. Because back in the 50s, when I used to eat them when I was a kid, they always had 2 or 3 seeds in them. The fuyu types we sell now are no longer the original fuyu. So they're not really called fuyu. Imoto, Izu, and Jiro are all probably descendant from fuyu, but they're totally seedless. Totally seedless. So, and to me, they're better tasting. So one of my friends has an orchard 2 miles this way. They've got a fuyu that was planted back in the 50s. It's the one with seeds. It's not quite as flat. It's a little bit rounded on the bottom, which I remember. Not as big. Not as good tasting. Whereas the fuyus we sell today are bigger, they're flatter, and to me, they're sweeter. And they're darker orange. The original fuyu was kind of a paler color. So on the fuyu types, we have the Jiro, which is the stuff you see in the supermarkets. And then there's the Imoto, which is a sport of Jiro, and then there's Izu. Now, it's kind of funny now that I think about it. I grew both of these when they first came out. And whenever we picked them and had a taste test, my dad and I both preferred this one. thinking it was the better tree. Well, it turns out that Emoto is this an early sport of Juro. So it ripens 2 weeks earlier than Juro. So if you eat them both at the same time, this is always riper. so so they're essentially the same plant. Izu is different. Izu is a little bit smaller fruit. And like Emoto ripens September into October, Jiro October, sometimes into November. Izu, August into September. I mean, when I first grew this one and started coloring up in July, I'm going, God, this thing is ripening in summer, and it does ripen in summer. The problem with it is these trees are really weak, and lately we haven't got any bare roots that were surviving, that were actually leafing out and doing well at all. So we do guarantee our bare roots for that reason. You know, if they don't wake up by May or June, bring them back in. But we didn't have any of the Izu, Fuyu persimmons make it this last year. None of them made it. We only lost, I think, 2 Jiros out of about 50. And I don't know if we got any Emotos this year. Some years they don't have the Emotos ready. So on the persimmons, generally buy them, pre-order them. You'll get the nice, because we get usually 20 to 25 nice ones of these, maybe 5 nice ones of the Izu. So if you get your order in fast, you get the nice ones. After the first 20 or so, the rest of them come with stems that are about this thick. We'd rather see them 1/2 inch or thicker, which is that thicker or thicker. So we get a few that size. Now this year with the cool summer, I don't know what we're going to get from them. They grow them for 2 years. So this first summer was hot. That helped. This summer was cool. So I don't know what our crop's going to look like on this year. We won't know till they come in. And then the other one we have to be careful with is there's chocolate and coffee cake. These two are non-astringent if they make seeds. If they don't have any seeds, they're inedible. So chocolate has plenty of male and female flowers on the same tree, and that always makes seeds. Seeds are pretty big inside and does have somewhat of a chocolate flavor to it. Coffee cake, if it's not next to a chocolate, it's hopeless. I mean, I had one of these at my house, and I thought, I've got so many persimmons in my house, I don't need to plant a chocolate. But apparently my other persimmons didn't make any male flowers, so my chocolate persimmon tree made 200 fruit this big, totally rubber-like flesh, no seeds. Couldn't eat any of them. I mean, I couldn't make them ripen. I'd freeze them, anything I can, they wouldn't ripen. So I just threw them all away. I said, okay, you cannot grow coffee cake without chocolate. If you don't have that pair, don't even think about it, because that fruit's not edible without the chocolate next to it. Saijo is considered the sweetest of the persimmons, but it's also the smallest, and that might be why it's the sweetest. It's only about that big. They don't need pollinator. So being the sweetest, like on jujube, same thing. The smallest one is honey jar. It's about the size of a big marble. It's considered the sweetest, but it's also the smallest. Whereas to me, Lee is like 20% sugar. That's plenty of sugar, and it's the biggest. Or Shanxi Lee is slightly bigger than Lee. So on jujubes, I go for size because they're all really sweet. Okay, so the pleuries are we think one of the best of the plum-like fruits we can sell now. So pleuries are a plum cherry cross. And 2 of the pleuries have really low chill. Candy Heart and Sweet Treat. And then there's Flavor Punch. So Candy Heart is our top seller. It tastes like a cherry. They're about this size of an apricot. Tastes like a cherry, texture of a plum. The Sweet Treat, a little bit longer shape, tastes like a plum, texture of a cherry. So they're two opposites. They pollinate each other really well, and they both bloom at the same time, and they both bloom. The chill on them is less than 300 hours by quite a bit. We don't know the exact chill on them yet, but they often bloom before the rest of the plums and pluots do. So we can't depend on them every year for pollination. Some years they bloom at the same time as the plums, but if we have a year that's warm, cool, warm, cool, warm, plum, a lot of times these will bloom a month before the other plums do, so they have to pollinate each other. But they've never missed a year, bloom-wise. Now, we got Sweet Treat well before we had Candy Heart, so we have a lot of crops there that weren't very good because we didn't have the pollination on it. But once we got the Candy Heart, where those two trees would load up next to each other, and they have good hang time. They're both ripen in July, so quality is really good. Both have good shelf life. So we think that's a really good addition to the stone fruit family. Now, just so you know too, I didn't mention this. Peaches that ripen in July and August tend to get worms in them, and we have to treat for that. The plums tend not to, and the cherries tend not to, apricots tend not to. I mean, I found so far one worm in a apricot tree, and I haven't found a single worm in a plum tree yet, so we don't usually worry about those. The peaches and nectarines that ripen in July, and nectar plum, anything that ripens in July, they ripen before July, they don't seem to get any, but there's a generation of that worm in July that goes after peaches and nectarines, and nectar plums ripening at that time, so be aware of that. The pleuries, we haven't seen any worms in them, although, you know, it's possible they can get them.
So Gary, you have that both Candy Heart and Sweet Treat?
We recommend them. Yeah.
Would those pollinate the cherries like a regular fruit?
They might if they bloom at the same time, but I haven't followed the bloom. These bloom pretty early. They might bloom along with mini royal, but I don't know. Even Dave Wilson's sales rep tells me it's just hard to figure out who's pollinating who. They said when they cut down a row of purple leaf plums, the ornamental plum trees, a lot of their trees stop producing fruit. I think the ornamental plum trees do some good pollination. Okay, on plums, they haven't been that reliable for the last 10, 12 years, but we love, you know, when I was growing up, I thought plums, that was my favorite fruit. And we don't like to give up on them because now and then we get a really good crop. So I'll put them down in their order of, well, the chill, so the order of blooming. Well, it's almost exactly like it is on here. So Beauty is first, lowest chill. Whoops. And then it's actually Satsuma and Burgundy. And then Weeping Santa Rosa. And then Santa Rosa. We might get another one in. I might be able to get an Inca. An Inca is actually the lowest chill of these. So you can check in January if I was able to get Inca. Inca is a yellow plum. Inca, Beauty, Satsuma, and Santa Rosa were all developed by Luther Burbank at least 100 years ago because he died in the 1920s. So Burgundy is a daughter of Satsuma gave rise to Mariposa. Mariposa gave rise to Burgundy. Burgundy is the newest one on here, but it's our workhorse plum because it is known to be the best pollinator of all of these. So if you need a pollinator for either pluots and potentially pleuries, Burgundy has the longest bloom period of any plum, and it is self-fertile. I've seen Burgundy bloom for over 2 months. And what's interesting, when the years when that happened, the fruit ripened over that same period. I remember picking the first plum off my Burgundy the end of June, and the last plum the beginning of September. I'm going, boy, this is a perfect plum tree. I can pick fruit all the way through summer. It's just crazy. I haven't seen it do that since, but we're getting back to the winters where that happened, where we had, you have a frost, then warm, frost, warm, frost, warm. That tree would get the bottom would bloom first, then the bloom would just work its way up the tree over a 2.5 month period. So all the way to the top of the tree. Now, Burgundy plum is a narrow, upright tree. I didn't have to prune the sides of it all, but it did grow 15 foot tall. But the final fruits ripen at the top of that tree in September. Whereas, my dad's Santa Rosa plums, you get 300, 400 plums all in 1 week. So, Santa Rosa, Dave Wilson's now admitting that the chill on it's greater than 400 hours, which you've kind of known all along, because my dad had a Santa Rosa plum for 10, 12 years, and he got one good crop off it. And I tried it for 20 years, and I got one good crop off it. So it needs a really cool winter. This is the first year we've ever seen plums on our Santa Rosa plums at the nursery. First year ever, because we had enough chill on it. So Santa Rosa, which is the most popular plum and the top rated plum, taste-wise, seems to need more chill than we can normally get, although a friend of mine who lives right next to a river, this weeping Santa Rosa never fails. So if you live next to a river, the Santa Rosa, weeping Santa Rosa will work. Inca does ripen in August. Beauty ripens in June, which is early for us. Satsuma's July. Burgundy's main month is July, just so you know. But Burgundy is just a nice one to have because of the bloom. Now, I forgot to mention, although we do mention it on our little information guide, is that the researchers have told the farmers that 5 foot wide is the best size to grow a fruit tree, because at 5 foot wide the sunlight can go through the entire tree, so it keeps every branch of that tree productive. If you go, in the old days it was 15 to 20 foot across for each fruit tree, and they noted that the outer 30 inches of the tree was where the fruit was being produced, and the inside was totally dark and nothing was happening. So you kind of waste your land that way. I mean, and also, I grew a 15 foot wide plum tree. My Mariposa plum was 15 foot wide. I had 2 weeks to eat 500 pieces of fruit. It's like, I might eat 2 or 3 a day at the most. And what do you do with that? But if you have a tree that's only 5 foot wide, you're down to maybe 50, 70, 80 pieces of fruit, which a family can deal with that. But a 500 fruit tree, I mean, on citrus, you have 5 months to eat it. It's okay. Avocados, you've got about 5 months to eat it. So there are trees that the fruit hangs well. The late apples hang really, really well. Citrus all hang well, except for Satsuma tangerine. Apples, the avocados, apples, the late apples hang well. But a lot of the other trees, they don't hang well, so you don't want to let them get too big. And what's nice about that, if you let it go 5 feet wide, you can have another different fruit tree every 7 feet throughout your garden. And, we have, if you go to Dave Wilson's website, this chart's on it that has the ripening period for each of their trees. Now, this ripening period is for the Central Valley, so you have to do a little modification for Orange County because a lot of things are late here and some things are early here. But every tree that they grow, every tree that's on our list, except for the nuts, I think. Well, they have the almonds on here. Then they have the wall. They have everything. So everything they grow is on their website on this chart. So you can buy the plant to give you the spread, like every apple we know will produce here that we sell, and the apples go from here. And I would tell you, the Granny Smith will hang on until February, and the Arkansas Black till January, and the Pink Lady, they got the hang time. They may not have it up in the Central Valley because the winters are rougher, but here, all the late apples can be stretched out at least 2 months beyond the dates. Okay, so the pluots are generally considered the best tasting fruit you can grow in our area, and there are some more reliable types. So the Dapple Supreme has never missed a year for us. So we know that one is less than 300 hours to chill. It ripens June, July, so it's a little early, but it'll hang until July, so that one's fine. Now all the pluots need pollinators, so it's nice to start with the burgundy, but if you get 3 or 4 different pluots, they should pollinate each other if you have a decent winter. So we have emerald drop, which we don't know enough about emerald drop. I may drop that one totally. I don't think it produces that well here, but Flavor Grenade has done quite well. And Flavor King is the best stone fruit I've ever eaten. Then we have Splash. Splash has never produced well for anyone, but it does taste like a cherry, which is interesting because it's a pluot, but it does have because when I've eaten Splash pluots, they taste like cherries. But the Apple Supreme is the best producer, but Flavor Grenade and Flavor King, if we get over 300 hours of chill, those things really kick in nicely. And in my yard, if the Burgundy Plum bloomed that year, because Burgundy Plum is a little more than 300 hours also, then the Flavor King was just loaded. I think Flavor King, the chill on, is actually a little lower than Burgundy, because I've had Flavor King flower and the Burgundy not, and then you don't get any fruit on the Flavor King. But that pair, Flavor King and Burgundy, if they succeed, you're in heaven. Flavor King is August into September, so the fruit can be picked early August or left on the tree until September. It's got a good hang time on it. Flavor Grenade is lower chill than Flavor King, and Flavor Grenade is September into October. That's the longest holding stone fruit we know of, all the way into October. Flavor Grenade's interesting because the fruit always feels like a rock. It can't be ripe, and then you pick it and you put your teeth into it. No, it's ripe. But on the tree, it feels like a stone. It's really an odd one. It feels like it's just too hard. So you could try Dapple Supreme, Flavor Grenade, Flavor King as a group, but it's always nice to have a Burgundy Plum around. Now we have 2 nuts that we sell, bare root, walnuts and almonds. They can both produce their second year. We had some flowering going on our walnut this year, but it didn't set anything when it's this young. Got a lot of little fruiting spurs, so it should flower really good next year. Walnuts, of course, can get big. They grow them down in Lake Elsinore. See these 40, 50-foot trees. The bad thing about walnuts is when they're blooming, they got a lot of sucking bugs up on the flowers, and it does get sticky underneath them. So don't plant this near a driveway or near your picnic table. Or, but this one does quite well in Orange County. That's why they call it Placentia. This almond does well too. Garden Prince almond. Although, if you're on a hilltop, maybe not. I'd put it flat ground or in a riverbed, you'd be fine. I brought a few other plants in. So I've always liked to grow coffee underneath some of the deciduous fruit trees because that seems to do, they seem to do real well with that. Shade in the summer heat and then full sun in the winter, they seem to do quite well. I used to grow them underneath my plum trees and they'll grow up about this high. Any questions today? I brought in a moringa just to show everyone that we have these now. We couldn't get them to grow this year because it's been so cool. Finally, when we got to the end of July, they started growing moringa. So moringa, we have a big moringa in our parking lot. It's a tree from India, and it is an important tree throughout the third world countries like India, like Africa. It's tropical, so the first winter we keep this in a container, maybe a 5-gallon, even a 15-gallon. They grow really fast when it's warm, but we only had a month of heat this year, or maybe 6 weeks of heat, so they're smaller than they should be. Once they're onto their second winter and they're about 6 foot, 7 foot tall, and about as thick as a broom, then they can handle the winters better. But first winter they can't. So on a moringa tree, the leaves are as edible as spinach. They taste like spinach. The flowers are edible. The seed pods taste like, if you boil the seed pods or steam the seed pods, they taste like asparagus. No, artichoke. Somewhere between asparagus and artichoke. So the plant's quite edible. It's the only tree we know of that you can actually eat the leaves on them. Most tree leaves you cannot eat. I think mulberry leaves are eaten a bit. And fig leaves, they wrap food in fig leaves. But these, and they have a lot of protein in them, so that's another way to get protein to the third world countries. They grow fast, about 20 to 30 feet, and they bloom. This one may bloom before winter and start making seed pods. So if you're in the tropics, you just plant the seeds every year and grow it as an annual crop. They'll come up this big, make their bean pods, pull out the trees, use the whole tree. They use it for something, and then they plant a new crop every 6 months. Plant a new crop. They said the bean pods on the younger trees are more edible, but on the older ones, on the older bean pods, the outer skin of the bean pod is not so edible, so you kind of peel the flesh off like an artichoke leaf. So, any questions on anything today? South side, it likes the heat, and you need to protect from the cold, so the south side is better. I mean, once they're big, we just have them in our parking lot. It doesn't need any help on its. Once you get it to about 6 or 7 foot tall, it doesn't need any help anymore.
You were saying on the fig leaves that they were edible. Those would have to be
Yeah, I don't know much about fig leaves, but I know some people wrap food in them. Grape leaves. Yeah.
Santa Rosa plum. I have a Santa Rosa that didn't produce this year. We have plenty of still out. So,
Well, how old's your tree?
probably 6, 7 years.
Yeah, it should be old enough.
I had ones on the last year.
That's interesting. Well, a lot of plum trees in fruit this year. So plums, they said, are unpredictable, whereas the peaches didn't fail this year. Peaches, the nectarines were pretty good too, but we had a lot of reports of plums not fruiting this year, even though we had the chill. But that can happen. Okay. Thank you.